Hello, everybody, and welcome to the April edition of the Agile IT Town Hall, once again hosted by Christy Guy, our program manager here for Agile Advisor. Today's topic is going to be Microsoft Defender for Identity. As we go through the session, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A panel. We will circle back on those at the end of the presentation, as well as at the end, we will not stop recording, but we will be not uploading that part to YouTube, so we can have an open discussion. But we do want to record them because we found with some of the previous technical questions that come up in our webinars and town halls that it's better if we have a recording that we can then share with our engineers in order to create a more thorough follow-up. With that said, take it away, Christy.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you everybody for joining us. Excited to talk a little bit more about Defender. Last time we spoke about Defender for endpoints. And before we jump in here, I just want to remind everybody that Agile IT, we are unapologetically focused on Microsoft Cloud Services. We really do believe that is the best path forward for our customers, and it's what we encourage. Today, some of the things we'll be talking about support why that is, and we'll dive into that a little bit down the road here. But to reorient ourselves within the Microsoft 365 Defender landscape, we have these four main areas. We've got identities, endpoints, email, and apps. And each of these are supported by the different Defender branches, which are similarly named. Like I said, last time we spoke about Defender for Endpoint, Plan 1 and Plan 2. In the future, we'll be talking about Defender for Office 365, Plan 1 and Plan 2, as well as Defender for Cloud Apps. Today, we're talking about identity. And just to kind of, again, bring some history in here, this was formerly Azure Advanced Threat Protection, or Azure ATP. I've seen in some places on the internet Advanced Threat Analytics described as a former version of Defender for Identity. That's not quite accurate. It is part of the story of how we got here and has some overlap in terms of capability, but Advanced Threat Analytics still exists as its own product. It's deprecated and kind of sits on its own, but Defender for Identity is the true replacement for Azure Advanced Threat Protection, which no longer exists. And you can get Defender for Identity either as a standalone license or bundled in other licensing options. We'll get into licensing pathways and strategies later on, but for now, this is kind of where we are in the Microsoft space. Now, kind of a quick touch on identity risk and why this matters. Well-known, users are the riskiest part of every environment. We also know that anyone who has IT in their title is going to be a target for threat actors. But the other thing that's important to remember is that hackers know that we expect IT people to be attacked and vulnerable. And so any IT team worth their salt usually does go out of their way to put protections in place for high privilege accounts. Low privilege users tend to be the more exploitable entry point, in part because low privilege users can often be forgotten by IT teams, or IT teams can be less concerned with them. Low privilege users also tend to be less sophisticated and thus more susceptible to phishing campaigns and things of that nature. So once in, even if it's through a low privilege account, threat actors have a lot of options. They can elevate their permissions within that account. They can create phishing campaigns that are originating internally and thus are harder to recognize even by users who might be savvier. And then the last thing that they can do that's important to kind of keep in mind here is they can access your sensitive data. Depending on your data permissions, they may not need higher access in order to gain proprietary information. So once in, a lot can go wrong, and that's where that's pretty important. Now, multi-factor authentication and conditional access do a really great job of making sure that the only people who are in your environment are people who are allowed to be there. The thing that's important to remember about identity risk is that while it is designed with an eye towards external threat actors, external threats aren't the only thing to keep on your radar. Internal threat actors, such as verified employees, may seek to increase their permissions. They may be accessing data that they're not supposed to and behaving atypically. So That's where Defender for Identity is a really strong tool in that it looks for and surfaces anomalous user behavior with an eye towards external threat actors, but also the tooling to support notifications for internal abuse. Now, how Defender for Identity works. This is predicated on an Active Directory. So if you are solely in Azure Active Directory and are not in a hybrid environment, then this isn't the product for you. What you're going to want is Azure AD Identity Protection, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for the purposes of Defender for Identity, this really assumes that you've got an on-premises Active Directory. It's looking at those signals, those entities. It's looking at the network traffic there, Windows events and traces. And it's doing that for your domain controllers as well as your ADFS. You'll be installing sensors on the places that you want to monitor and gather input from. But all of that you kind of see here under this white cloud for Microsoft Defender for Identity, that's happening over there. What you see also on the Microsoft 365 Defender Blue Cloud is how this kind of feeds into making Defender for Identity even stronger. As a general rule, all of the Defender products, when used in tangent with each other, increase the data that gets built towards the user baselines. And so if you're using multiple Defender products, you're making each product stronger because you're gathering more data points to tone down the false alerts and false notifications, as well as getting a better understanding of when a user is truly acting atypically or whether or not they're doing something that they usually do but might typically be seen by a different Defender product. And so that's where Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, and Defender for Cloud Apps can be really valuable additions alongside Defender for Identity and vice versa. So kind of the four key areas of what Defender for Identity does is this reducing the attack surface, real-time detections, threat investigation, and then threat response. So on the attack surface end, we're looking at security assessments for your identity posture. It's both flagging things such as users or devices using clear text passwords, and it's also giving you recommendations for security best practices. Another piece of that is that Defender for Identity detects on-premises attacks of ADFS, so you're getting protection there too. When you're getting these detections, what Defender for Identity is really looking for is that reconnaissance, compromised credentials, lateral movements, and domain dominance, and you're going to get notifications around that. Those actions are considered part of the kill chain of threat actors, and that's how it is visualized in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. Now, we know that threat actors don't follow a step-by-step rubric on how to hack an environment, but this makes it easier for anyone who is new to SecOps to kind of understand how these various threats show up and why they matter, especially if they're happening in conjunction with each other. Again, the user baselines are created through data points collected from each Defender product. And so you don't actually have to create a baseline for standard user behavior. It's going to create that for you automatically for each individual based on what they're typically doing day to day and any behavior that diverges from that. Like I just said, the Microsoft 365 Defender portal is where you're going to be seeing and managing those alerts. And if you're using multiple Defender products, instead of seeing individual alerts, what the portal does, it consolidates them into what Microsoft calls incidents. And that'll just be showing you how different things are coming together. So if a phishing campaign that gets flagged by Defender for Office 365 then leads to compromised credentials that gets flagged by Defender for Identity, you kind of start to see the story of how this threat is coming together. And it might change how you choose to respond to it. Maybe seeing that coordinated attack elevates its priority for you. Maybe seeing the lack of coordination makes you see that this isn't a false positive and not something to worry about, but it gives you more information as to what's happening rather than just giving you lots of little red lights that something has gone wrong. And so in the last piece here for responding to threats, each alert is given a priority score, which kind of helps identify which ones matter the most and which ones should be acted on as soon as possible. Again, to cut down on noise, aside from the benefit of the user baselines helping really surface legitimate threats rather than just every possible notification. Defender for Identity also integrates with Microsoft Sentinel. So if you are using Sentinel, and it's a two-way integration. So if you're using Sentinel, you can use that as your primary alert center. And if you resolve a threat in one portal or the other, it resolves it in both places. So you don't have to go and get those both up to speed to match. So when considering Defender for Identity, some kind of basic considerations here. Again, hybrid environment. If you are solely in Azure Active Directory, you're going to want to go with Azure AD Identity Protection instead. That's part of Azure AD Premium Plan 2, which is included in EMS E5. Our next slide here is going to be the licensing pathways, and you'll see that EMS E5 is included in all of the Microsoft 365 EU5 licenses that build up from it. And so if you have just Azure Active Directory and you're looking to benefit from identity protection, that's going to be the way you do it for that scenario. Next thing is going to be, you will need to license every user. I know this question came up last time for endpoint, specifically for Defender for Identity. One of the challenges here is that once you have a user with that capability, so even if you have an admin with Microsoft 365 E5, there are no guardrails to prevent that capability spread, but Microsoft lays the responsibility with you to make sure that you are not using it beyond your licensed users. So if you are playing around with it from one license, you're seeing that you like it and you do want to use it, you're going to want to make sure to license that for every user, lest you be out of compliance and face fines and back charges for that capability. And then lastly, the use of other Microsoft 365 Defender products. If you are already evaluating another one and you've been considering identity, or if you already have other Defender products in place, they're all stronger when they're with each other. So one way you can do that is through add-ons. Another way is just by getting one of the licenses that has them all bundled in. Again, we'll talk about that next slide. But really, these products are stronger together. So if you're considering it, if you already have them and you're considering it Defender for Identity, this is a good way to go about that. And if you can't go with a bundled product, but you really want to know which two add-ons are going to be the most advantageous, Defender for Identity paired with Defender for Endpoint is probably your best bet. Okay, so again, Defender for Identity is available as a standalone license, and you can get that and apply it to your existing user licensing. It's included in the Enterprise Mobility and Security E5 or A5 for education. And then EMS Security E5 is included in the following levels of the Microsoft 365 E5 license: the E5 Security license, the F5 Security license, and then the F5 Security and Compliance license. So if you're looking to add that, that's a way to do it. Quick note here that the Microsoft 365 E5 license includes all of the Defender products. So by the time you've got two add-ons, you're getting pretty close to price parity with just buying that E5 license. It does look expensive, but once you're in a place where you've got at least two of the Defender add-ons, and if you're looking at any other add-ons besides that, you're close enough to what it would cost you, and you're missing out on a lot of features if you're not just biting the bullet and going for it. All right, that's everything on Defender for Identity today. We'll move on to questions. Quick blurb for future town halls here. We have the Office 365 Plan 1 and Plan 2 next. After that, we'll wrap up Defender with Cloud Apps, and then down the road here, we'll be diving into the Power Platform with Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate.